Welcome everybody. I'm excited to be here. It's my first Florida Drupalcamp. Been wanting to come here for a long time, so excited to be here. I'm from the Charlotte area, so I've kind of done the Atlanta camps and Asheville camps and things like that, and more so, but definitely been wanting to make it to Florida. So today we're going to talk about Decoupled Drupal with Flutter. And if you don't know much about Flutter, don't worry, we'll get into some of that. My name is Mark Shropshire, and I work at Media Current, and there's a little bit about myself there. I had a background in IT and development and leading teams, but still can't get away from the technology. Love being involved with tech and learning new things. So on today's agenda, we're going to talk about why would you do Drupal in a native application? So that's where Flutter comes in. Let's just build native applications. But we're going to talk about exactly why would you do that and what's that all about. And then we're going to dig into what is Flutter, and then more about what's Firebase, in case you're not familiar with that, because that's a piece of the technology we're using here. And then we're going to dig into the Mommy Recipe Magazine native application, which is a demo. We'll get into some code and things like that, which will be fun. So bear with all the informational slides, and we'll get to some actual coding and things like that, which will be fun. A little bit of Q&A. So a little bit about Media Current. We're a full-service digital agency, so design, strategy, development, SEO, all those types of things. Focused on open source. Kind of where we focus in on a lot of CMS work and building applications for enterprises. So we're always excited to be doing that, and been around since 2007. Before we get started, I want to do this early. I did mention being from the Charlotte area. I go to the Asheville Camp a lot. This is a great camp. Asheville, also a great camp. So just want to encourage everybody to check that out. It's coming up in July. I'm one of the camp organizers, and really excited to be doing that again this year. I've got stickers with me, so if anybody wants a camp sticker, they're well made, they're good stickers. Let me know. Happy to pass some out. But that is coming up in July, so stay tuned for more info about that, and enjoy visiting all the bears and nature and stuff in the Asheville area, because they are real and they're there and they run through the town, so it's pretty fun. So we'll dig into now a little bit about why in the world would you do native applications with Drupal anyway. So everybody here, I imagine, uses Drupal, but that's not always an assumption. I met a WordPress developer today that's here at the camp. So, but for all of us that have been involved with Drupal for a long time, we know it's a very good CMS backend. It also has front-end capabilities, but this is kind of an extension of decoupling Drupal, where you just use the Drupal content editing experience to handle all of that input and manipulation of the content. But then we now make front ends and all kinds of technologies like React and Vue and Angular and all the JavaScript technologies. But there's other technologies out there that allows us to build native applications for user interfaces. And this goes even beyond just making websites and things like that. They're informational. We're actually making applications people use. But I couldn't jump into native apps without first talking about progressive web apps. I've got a talk out there from Drupalcamp Atlanta this last year on progressive web apps, and so that's worth checking out. But I did want to mention this. I do see kind of where we've been building responsive web for years now, since probably circa 2010, and then progressive web apps offer a lot of technologies that may fit your needs fine. It gives you some app-like experiences with web, but there are times when you need native applications. So, and just extending on the PWA kind of conversation here, why would you build a progressive web application where it's not native, it's enhanced, web experience? Well, first of all, user experience. PWA has more control over caching. You've got some other advantages with technologies that allow you to actually install the applications on your phone, so it feels more app-like, especially on Android. And you got offline access, which is great. And then conversions. There's a number, and it's in my talk from Atlanta, but there's a number of examples. Pinterest is one, Twitter's one, but Pinterest has a great article out there, their engineering team, on how conversions went up drastically. I don't mean just like, it went up 5%. I mean like it went up, in large amounts of conversions for their product just by simply launching a progressive web application over just their previous mobile app. And then budget. All of this costs money, so you have to evaluate the cost and what you expect on your return for that cost that you put into it. Building websites can be costly, building PWAs can be costly, building native applications can be costly, so you want to look at that. And PWA, you can take a website and you can start adding PWA technologies, which can save you over the cost of building a native application is really the point there. But as far as when do we build native applications, this is where it gets interesting, I think. So native applications can give you maximum speed of the hardware because it's compiled down to native code. You're not running through web browsers in the middle. You don't have any types of bridging going on there, so you can get more speed. And a lot of times, I've heard developers scoff at the app stores, but from a marketing standpoint, app stores are real. Like for us developers, we know we can install websites on phones and things like that as a PWA, but if your competition's in the App Store, you probably need to look at being in the App Store. So that's a runway for that.
Sorry.
No problem. So and then actual feature access. When you're building natively, especially if you were building an application directly in Kotlin or Java with Android or Swift or Objective-C with iOS, you're going to have immediate access when new hardware comes out and APIs come out that takes time to deliver that to other technologies, like web and things like that, although that is on its way too. But right now, a good example, and I've got up on the list here, is push notifications are not supported by Safari on iOS for PWAs, and so that's something that I've run into, and others I work with run into occasionally with push notifications using tools like Flutter and other native application tools. We get push equally on both platforms. And so there's our stack. You've got these different options. And they're not in any priority order really, but I kind of think of it like building on top of things. You've got responsive, PWA, and native again. And you don't have to do all of those. You can pick and choose what makes sense for the project. But those are some examples of why you would use them. The marketing, the app stores, enterprise deployment is also a benefit for native applications. This goes beyond, by the way. We'll talk a bit about like Android and iOS targets and platforms, but when I'm talking native applications now with Flutter, we're talking about building Flutter for the web, building Flutter for desktop, Linux, Windows, and Mac, building Flutter apps for iOS and Android, also from one single code base. So it's a different world. It's kind of the promise of what Java was years. I remember back in the 90s. Java was, and it runs on everything, but it runs better on some things than others, and it's found its home. But this seems to be that same type of promise, and I'm pretty excited about it. And here's a common decoupled Drupal scenario. You've got your Drupal 8 backend. You've got some sort of API. Could be JSON API. Could be GraphQL. Could be some other type of REST API from Drupal. I'd say JSON API now. GraphQL is becoming super popular. And then you've got your native applications. Maybe it could be phone or tablets. Again, could be desktop and things like that. So, but not a lot different than not a lot different here. This also could just be React, right? This could be a React phone app or something. So So now let's talk about Flutter. Let's get all of Flutter about this. Why is it exciting? Well, so Flutter it's really just a front-end UI kit. That kind of is a little belittling to say it like that. But that ultimately is what it is. You're building components in a real friendly way, and it allows you to put together these applications very simply and connect to backends. But this is really the exciting part to me, being able to build one code base and deploy to all these different places. Mobile is production ready now. Web is in technical preview and should be coming out pretty soon into stable production grade releases. Desktop is in different places. I think Mac is ahead of some of the others right now, but Linux and Windows will also be there, and that's pretty neat if you have those applications. And speaking of applications, the reason you might do that is, let's say that you built a really nice web app, and then someone says, well, we want to build a native app. And if you go with Flutter, down the road, if that app needs to have some native functionality on a desktop, you can then just target the desktop. Now, I don't like to use the word easy. Development's not easy, it's hard. So it's not a simple, you can compile it, and I can take that code and compile it, but there are going to be things you want to adjust in the layouts and things like that to make it look good on a desktop. And so when I look at new technologies, I look for basically flags. They're indicators, right? I've been involved with Drupal for about 15, 16 years, and I'm seeing the same flags with Flutter. That's all Drupal, slightly different. It's a different setup, different thing. It's not CMS. But there's things that I look for and why I think some technology is about to explode. And some of this is, you've got Google behind it. There's dedicated teams developing Flutter. They've already got first-class integrations with a number of tools, especially developer tools, very developer-centric. So they didn't focus just on Android Developer Studio, which would make sense, right? That Google would do that. That's their Xcode equivalent from iOS. But they've also made it happen in Visual Studio Code. They've got full support in Visual Studio Code. You can do most of the things. Funny thing is, you still need Xcode for iOS for some things. You still need Android Dev Studio for some other things. But I pretty much develop Flutter full time on NVS Code when I'm doing that. It's fully open, not just open source. Very transparent team. They're not keeping anything hidden. They want this all out here for people to use because they're now pushing this internal for many of their upcoming projects we'll talk about. Documentation's awesome, and there's pub.dev is their equivalent to npm in the JavaScript world. It's their package site. You can pull packages in for Flutter and Dart, which is the language behind Flutter. Talk about that in a minute. Any questions so far? All right. So just to draw some, because I'm familiar with React and JavaScript development, probably many of you are. In Flutter, they say everything's a widget. So a widget is real similar to saying in React everything's a component. Kind of sounds familiar. Same concept here. Just widget is a widget, and it is true. It's true to an extent, but really you can make your own widgets pretty easily, your own components. But there's plenty of widgets that are already in core that you can use that cover many use cases. So out of the box, you can get a proof of concept running very quickly in material design because that's the go-to kind of standard that they've got. But they also do have in Flutter a Cupertino set that mimics an iOS experience. So now we'll talk about what that means. What do I mean by mimic an iOS experience and mimic an Android experience, those types of things. So some of you may be familiar with React Native. This is a popular framework, and it gets a lot of comparisons. People always want to say, what's the difference between React Native and Flutter? I'm not going to dig into all those differences right now, but one thing that holds back React Native in some aspects, and some other JavaScript technologies, trying to bridge into the core hardware of native applications is you have this bridge. There's a conversion bridge that happens where JavaScript code has to be translated on the fly to access all the pieces inside the platform and services. What Flutter's approach is, instead of Flutter bridging to those native widgets, Flutter says I don't want to mess with Android's native widgets or iOS's native widgets. Give me a clean slate. I want a pixel by pixel draw everything on the screen. So what Flutter does is Flutter handles all the rendering. It has translations for the platform channel so it can access the hardware pieces. But instead of having that bridge, it's doing all the rendering. It's drawing every pixel. So there's a lot of time the team and the community spends making sure that a date picker, like that's a common one. Date picker in iOS looks very different than on Android. So that's a good example. Make sure those date pickers look correct on the platforms. And Flutter uses Skia, which is a very low-level native, very fast platform for rendering graphics, and that's what's behind the scenes. You don't really have to deal with that day to day as a Flutter developer, but it's good to know the technologies behind it, and that's how they're able to do that quickly. Because when I first heard about this, I was like, wow, that sounds slow if I have to draw every pixel, and it's not really. It's pretty fast. So here's some apps that are built with Flutter from the, I think it was put on the Flutter website. So I think Hamilton was the first Flutter app that kind of was out there and popularly used, and when that Broadway production was out there and then went on tour, obviously that app would probably be used quite a bit. And there's many more that are happening, and I don't have current counts. I don't remember current counts of the apps, but it's growing rapidly. So I mentioned this earlier. So Flutter is not just for Android and iOS. It sort of is now, but it's quickly moving. I'd say web is next. Which is interesting for Drupal developers and folks that do React development in web. It brings up scenarios like, when would I start with just Flutter and just target web and Android and iOS? Or when would I just build a Flutter app for the native pieces, but still do Drupal, Gatsby, React, whatever toolings you prefer for web, the way we've been doing web and currently doing web. Kind of my current answer to that would be, if as soon as the community feels like that Flutter for web is production ready and things like that, I kind of feel like build web the way you're doing it and comfortable. And then on your native, if you're building mobile in Flutter, have that, that's fine. But if you get to a place where you didn't have a website, your application in web, and you started with native Android or iOS, let's say that the stakeholder says, hey, we'd like to have this on the web, you've got an entry point to the web pretty quickly with that. But also, like I said, desktop, this isn't mentioned as much in Flutter talk right now, but I think it's just out there just to show the idea that the idea is to really push this as a technology that can target really anything in the future that comes out. It's kind of open-ended like that, is the embedded idea. So an example of that is running Flutter on Raspberry Pis, which some people have tried to do, and with, I think, mixed success right now. And then also the Google Nest is all Flutter, I believe. So that's an example of what's happening there. So some of the things about Flutter that I think are real interesting here is you've got very fast development with Flutter, expressive and flexible UI. These are some of their marketing points, and native-like performance. That's really the key. This is one of the first platforms I've seen. This was an indicator for me that is really getting close to native performance. But being able to deploy to Android and iOS with one codebase versus Scenario, web agency, right? Web agency has lots of great web developers, let's say. And let's say web agency says, we want to get into native phone development. What does that look like? In the past, it's looked like, let's hire an Android team, hire an iOS team, and we have a web team. None of them talk together. They're all developers. They're all friendly, right? They have their preferences. That's fine. But it's not a shared experience. You can't do shared trainings. You can't do all that. So I'm seeing Flutter as a technology that can be ramped into agencies and for web developers independent, pretty quickly. And some of that has to do with this next piece, and that's Dart. Dart's the language chosen. A lot of people ask, hey, why Dart? Why didn't they use JavaScript? I heard of Dart one time, and then I never heard about it again. That's a common one. I felt the same way, because Dart's been out for years. It was Google's attempt, I think, originally to have a JavaScript alternative. Things don't, VHS, Betamax, there's examples. I mean, I think JavaScript's great, but I'm just saying that there's the thing that wins. Sometimes things that win in the marketplace, it's for a number of reasons. Dart is used a lot in Google for different projects, but they had to select a language that had some capabilities, and some of that is to allow Flutter to do hot reloading. It's some of the capabilities that allows it to do that. So I'll show a demo of that in a minute. But with Flutter, I could make a change and be in debug mode and immediately see that change effect in the UI. And it's pretty amazing. So some of Dart's capabilities are there. It's productive, it's fast, it's multi-platform, which was another important piece. But one thing that I really like about Dart is the syntax. It's just very familiar feeling to me as a developer. It feels parts that feel a little JavaScript. I know Java developers that are doing Flutter now, and they look at it and go, it feels kind of like Java. And I'm like, oh, that's so funny. Like, it feels at home once you learn some of, its nuances and things. And then I even had, and at Media Current, we've got a developer who has been doing Swift, and his comment was, wow, it's got some similarities to Swift. There's some things missing, there's some things, but and I'm like, it's funny. Like, it's great. That tells me that I can onboard developers quickly into a different language and it not be a major pain and a struggle. And that because we don't have time to do that. And another thing that's kind of great is too, Dart is, this is pulled from, I think this is PR's, not convinced, but from GitHub. This was pulled just a couple months ago, but Dart Symbol 15, yes, the PR's, I got it in the title. Dart Symbol 15, it's one of only a couple of the fastest growing languages on GitHub, according to this, and you can break down the stats and make your own conclusions, but Dart is growing from that respect, which is great to see, and I'm sure it has a lot to do with Flutter going 1.0. So, has anybody heard of Fuchsia OS? Anybody heard of this? So, this is a project that Google's working on. This is the thing I'm about to tell you. It's not an NDA. I don't have special information. This is stuff I kind of picked up from the community, things like that. Fuchsia is a OS that Google's investing into. It's a number of people think that that this will replace Chrome OS and Android long term, and every bit of Fuchsia, all the apps in Fuchsia are built using Flutter. You start to see what's happening with this technology. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? All this may go away in 2 years, this technology, but these are things I see as indicators. I think it's pretty neat. So I'm going to do a quick what's Firebase. We're using Firebase in this one. You can use AWS, you can use Mongo, you can use MySQL, you can use whatever backend with Flutter you want. But Firebase is easy to wire up to it. So I just want to say Firebase, if you hear people talk about Firebase, you're not familiar, a lot of people think Firebase is just a database. It has a database, a real-time database in it, and the new Firestore, but it's also much more. It has analytics and other tools, so it's not just that. So it's really an ecosystem to help build and host. You can do React apps and host on there. You can build iOS and Android native apps, Flutter apps, and this is some of their key points. There's no infrastructure. I mean, I like to say Firebase is a good place to get up and running on. And then when you start looking at costs and things like that down the road, you can always look at AWS and other alternatives to see what works out better for you. But like to build a lot of what I get out of Firebase with AWS, there's a little bit more wiring you have to do and figure out in AWS. But but it's a good place to start. It's a good place to do proof of concept work. You get plenty of, I say plenty, it's a relative, but for me, like doing proof of concept things and demoing things, like I don't need to go out of the free tier. It's it's a good place to be. But I think it's a if you're already an AWS shop and have certified folks and people familiar with it, go for it. With AWS, no problem. And so Firebase, again, kind of dedicated teams working on Firebase. They've got all these first-class integrations with lots of tools, really good documentation. The one thing that I would say about their documentation that cracks me up, hope it's going to change, is the code examples on Firebase has every language, it seems like, not every language, but a lot of languages and frameworks, does not have Flutter examples yet, which is hilarious. So it feels like Drupal in that I'm relying on blog posts and Medium posts to find like examples to do things. But there was some recent news that came out in the last week from the community and from Google doing some surveys that the Flutter team is actually going to embed development with and some developers teams between the Flutter and Firebase teams to really kind of work on some of that. They didn't say documentation, but it seems like that would be part of it. So, wow, I talked for a bit here, and we're getting close. We're getting close to some stuff. So I promise to hang English. So, who's familiar with the Umami recipe food magazine demo? So this comes now in Drupal 8. So what I'm going to show today is a demo project I've started that basically uses some of that content, since it's kind of familiar to the Drupal community, at least in recent times. If you want to kind of demo Drupal 8 and how we can build a native app with it. So one thing that's important before anybody would jump in, and I would say this to anybody, would jump in and say, let's just build a native app, is it costs money. You kind of want a use case. Like, if a PWA does the job, I would never recommend just go build a native app, because it may cost hundreds of thousands of dollars that you don't want to spend, and it may not be a great idea. So this is a screenshot of if you install latest Drupal 8.2, I think, that's the latest, but there is an experimental install profile. You can install this Umami install profile, which has a theme. The idea is it's basically a fictitious food magazine site. You can pull up recipes and articles and things. So it's a good way to demo what Drupal can do and that sort of thing. But here's the use case. I was like, okay, where would you build a companion app for a food magazine, a native app, right? Well, let's say that we want to utilize the Google Play and Apple App Store to market Umami. That's a reasonable reason, right? Our competitors, other recipe apps, are all over the app stores. We should be in there. Maybe we did PhoneGap before, and anybody that's done PhoneGap, you may not want to do that again. And then you want to keep the Umami Recipe Magazine brand top of mind, so it allows you to have from a marketing standpoint, you say we've done apps in the app stores and we look like everybody else. Maybe that's the list priority. But you've also got some useful features. To me, this is the important one. What are the useful features that I can do in a native app that I can't do with a PWA, just native, or just a website, that make it interesting? And that's where this, to me, becomes a companion. I call it a companion native application that goes with the website, goes with the rest of the technology set. We're loading. I don't know what. All right, we'll go back to that slide. It's loading. So the Contenta Flutter, and that's what this project is. This is the current architecture setup. Real simple. We've got a Flutter app living here. It's reading content, which is that Umami recipe. Right now, it's reading recipe data from Contenta. It's they've got a public API out there, so you can build example consumers. So we're reading recipe data into the Flutter app. We're not pushing data back to Drupal. This is one of those deals where we're like, hey, we're making a companion app. It's not to edit anything on the website. We're not trying to do that. We're really trying to say, put recipes in, and what creative things can we do with that content now? Well, one of the things we have today is to show us we can actually do save favorites with your recipe favorites. All that data goes into Firebase. So anytime we need to copy the recipe, maybe the user access recipe, they want to, in the future, fork the recipe so they have their own version of it. They want to make grocery lists. Some of these apps, recipe apps do that. All that stuff would then stay in Firebase. You could use Google sign-in, Apple sign-in, different authentication so the user gets their own custom setup. We just won't worry about that slide. So that's the structure. Let's dive in and look at this. And I am going to zoom and make sure everything is legible here. So currently on Contenta Flutter, let's see. All right, I can't get that over, but it's all right. There we go. So what I've got here, I've got an eye simulator. It's the iPhone 11 Pro because I love the camera. All right, wide angle, it's amazing. But just kidding, this won't take pictures. It's just a simulator. You know that already, but this is, and then I've got VS Code. I'm comfortable with VS Code from Drupal and React, mostly JavaScript, React stuff, or that kind of stuff. So I was so happy that I could just install Flutter. And so in VS Code, you get this little nifty Flutter scaffold here. Shows you all the breakdown of your app. And so this application is, let me size this down a little bit. So this application, our main concern is, so this is Dart, and everything in the master branch right now, I've got kind of the current working version. There's a new version with multi-screens that's in develop branch if you want to check it out. But this is a good one to demo. This is a Dart file, and I've got everything in the main.dart file just for simplicity. But the new version, kind of like JavaScript, really, I find it familiar. Like I got these import statements, and so I can organize my code however I really want into folders, break it up. If you want to do it, have models and screens or views and that kind of thing. Make folders for those, and then you can just import any of the packages that you want. Now, these imports are not other bits of code I've written. These are actual packages that you need to do things. So, can everybody see that? Okay, should I zoom some more? It's a little. Is that better? That might be better. So, material, that gives me material design. I've got JSON API, so I can do a JSON API client and read from Drupal. I've got HTTP as core with Flutter, so that's just to actually do the JSON API requires that, so it can handle all of those transactions. And then Cloud Firestore is the package so that we can interact with Firestore. So let me fire this app up and just show you what it does here. So I just did function F5, kind of like normal, to kick off the debugger. So this is always it's going to take the longest to always do this. The first time we fire up, it's going to debug mode. It's running Xcode build, so in the background it's going out to Xcode. It's doing builds through the CLI, and at that point, it's doing kind of all the things it needs to wire up enough so that we can actually run it in the simulator. And then, so 19 seconds, that's pretty fast to get that going. Real simple app though. So this is a great, so if anybody's done iOS development before, anybody in here done iOS development? So builds can take a while. And you can, this is I feel like they're a little faster on Android, maybe a lot faster, but builds can take a while and really hinder you in your development workflow. So this is what I'm about to show you with Hot Reload is really great and will help. I think it'll give you some contrast to the experiences of iOS, certainly for me. This is the app. So we have the umami recipe. It's a real simple one-page thing. This data, the titles, the simple titles of this, that's coming through JSON API. It's coming in from the Drupal API backend. Contenta hosts it, I'm sure for free on Pantheon. They got them to help host it, so it's always up and available. We just simply read those titles, and then when we favorite or unfavorite, and I've already favorited a few, but if I was to favorite that one or unfavorite that one, those are actually stored in Firestore. So you can see these happening live on the over here. We're going to see under recipes. I'm just right now saving the UID for those, just because it's simple to do. You can see them go away, and I can add them. On the new app, we're not doing that. The new version of this, we're actually going to store the full recipe and then have a favorites boolean to track that. But just to show how that's wired up. So, hot reload. Let's do a demo of this. I'm going to scroll into, we'll talk about some of this code here in a minute, but I'm going to scroll into the core here. And we've got some title text here. So this doesn't look too bad, does it? Well, it does look bad because that thing's hovering over it. All right. So we've got a widget and scaffold, return scaffold. That's saying, hey, Flutter, we're about to send you some UI elements we want you to render. First thing first is the app bar. So that makes sense. Like need a Flutter or whatever, and I go, oh, app bar. Okay, I get it. That's where the umami recipes text is. And I can see it there. So let's look at hot reload. So let's say that I want to do like the umami logo, which is on the site here. So this is the logo for and I've got it running in DDev. By the way, DDev, it's awesome. So I've got it running. That's the logo. Let's say I want to get that logo and make it look nice in the app bar instead of having the text there. So let's see if we can do this. No, wait a minute. I don't have to do that. I can do this. There we go. That was easy. Just get reset. And so now what we have is I've got, now I haven't saved it yet, okay, so nothing's changed. But I'm setting the size, I'm extending the size of the app bar to accommodate. Child just says, hey, there's a child of this preferred size. It's that I'm going to have some more widgets coming in. And so I've got now an image, a title widget is now, instead of text, I can apply another widget to it. So I'm going to apply the image asset. Image asset means, in Flutter world, that means that it's a local asset when you're displaying image. You can do network images too. So I've just got a folder on the left here with my images. So there's a logo. And then there's a pub/spec YAML file, which lets you configure some things for Flutter. And one of the things you do in this is actually set up your assets. This always catches me. I'll go, why is things not rendering? Why is the exceptions being thrown? This is the common call, by the way. So if you mess around with Flutter, like if you forget to do the add the assets, that'll happen. So let's jump back to here. So I'm going to hit save. Let's keep an eye on the recipe app here. All right, save. Boom. That's pretty fast. And so that's the general, that you can kind of, just with that quick demo, you can kind of see development workflow and the speed of development that you can have working with this to be able to have, it feels like developing web, where I can refresh and boom, I've got immediate response and this is contained. There are, if you're installing packages in some situations, you do have to, like if I'm in debug, I might have to go up here and restart the debugger, or the debugger may flake out and I just have to stop it completely and restart it. There are cases, but that is experience. Changing images, changing layouts, it's pretty amazing. Any questions so far?
I got a question.
Sure.
Could you potentially build like a live video streaming app with this, or is that a bit too heavy for something like this?
Like for video, audio,
yeah, like
kind
a
of
live
things.
Streaming app.
No, I mean, I think some of that may be already out there. I can't remember. I feel like some people have built stuff like that with Flutter already. Now I don't know, like, I can't remember which apps, example-wise, it's not like YouTube is running Flutter right now. So I don't know. I mean, possibly. I think you could push this pretty far, and it's only going to keep getting better. It has the track record of just the last 3-4 years of Flutter, since it used to be called Sky. Google didn't own that name. They had acquired a company that owned the IP for Flutter, which was something else, and so they were able to pick up that name. But in that time frame, several years, like this, you can see the investment they're putting into it. There's more to this than just like give GiftDrop a really great tool to use. Like they're doing this for their reasons. So yeah, I think it's possible.
Google Stadia is built to a Flutter.
I think you're right. That sounds familiar. I think you're right. Yeah. So that may be the one I was thinking of. Actually, there's something rattling around. So Google Stadia is one to look at.
Stadia?
Yeah.
It's like the video game streaming.
Oh,
It's the twitchy kind of thing.
It's a solid, probably closest example for what you're thinking.
Yeah, and that this isn't to say that like there can be reasons like if you're only developing native apps for Android, you don't care about iOS. There's reasons to say, well, I'm familiar with Kotlin. I'm gonna keep doing that, until Google moves to Flutter. I'll keep doing that. It's gonna be a while. They're gonna give on-ramps and all that because there's a lot of Android developers. So, probably why Google's not talking a lot about this plan in public and stuff a whole lot, just because they don't want to upset a bunch of people because they know they can't rip all that out from people without having some way to convert over. So no, that was awesome. Thank you. This is just to kind of pick up on a little bit of the code here. This is actually the so another kind of neat thing about Flutter that I compare with JavaScript. So Flutter has futures, it's like promises in JavaScript. So I've got, this is my code using the JSON API package. It lets me go out to grab this recipe list. This is not built to be performant. You can see I'm just say give me the whole list, so it's not paging or anything. Dart has Stream Builder, so what you would do when you want to do paging and that sort of thing, you want to use Stream Builder to pull those in, and it kind of does a lot of magic to handle it for you. You don't have to do too much, but it'll pull in just what you need at the time if you had thousands or millions of records, that sort of thing. And then I've got another feature that goes and grabs the list of favorites, because as you saw when I started the app, I had to actually go and query and say, all right, which favorites do I have? And this is why I'm refactoring the app and making different pages, is because this is kind of gross, because as far as the code goes, because right now I'm doing this. It's cool that you can do this, but I'm having to do some weird stuff where I say I'm doing my future wait, so it's waiting, it's like async wait stuff, and I'm saying give me the recipes from Drupal, give me the favorites from Firebase. It can wait on multiple futures, but it still feels weird because I'm sort of in the later down here in the content grabbing snapshot data from different places. And so the new app is going to have one screen that pulls in the original list of recipes. As soon as you view the recipe, it's just going to pull the whole recipe content over into Firestore, and then you just work from Firestore from that point on. It'll let me use Stream Builder and other things like that. So I'm going to show you a bit about and we'll have time for some questions here too while we build this. I'm going to check out the develop branch, and when I check it out, Flutter package here, it knows to go out and do a Flutter pub get. It knows to update all the packages automatically. All that happens, which is cool. This is the newer version. It's not wired up to data yet, so it's not as exciting, but I do have all the screens set up: about page, favorites page, the recipe detail, home, and then I've got a widgets folder with the bottom nav, so we got some nav going. But let me fire this up, and we'll let that build. This is like the home screen, and I'm laying this out so it's a lot cleaner. So the idea is to actually have fairly short files that are readable instead of one large file. So we'll let that fire up. So any questions so far? Drupal, the Decoupled, the Flutter, anything? Well, what's for lunch? There we can watch it build there. And this Contenta Flutter is open source. So everyone in here has opportunity this weekend to go and help me on this project. It's open source. I'm just throwing it out there. So this is fake data, sort of hard coded in, but we've got, you see the list. We're going to have images on the side. That'll be pulled through JSON API somehow. Bio and I were looking at that recently, and it's we've got to figure out how to make that work to grab the images relationship. But we have the title, the type of category. So this is a snack. I love that pizza's called a snack. I go for that. I would categorize pizza as a snack. It means you can eat more later. We're showing the difficulty and the time it takes to prepare it. A 14-minute pizza, that sounds awesome, quicker than I can get it delivered. Then when you go into, and this looks gross right now because it's like just me dumping some text and widgets in just so I can kind of feel for what the pages would be. So the text isn't formatted every way I want, but the idea is I've got the big picture of the recipe, got the title, some details, and then here's where you favorite it. So once you favorite it, you just simply go right here to the favorites list. You'll have a list of favorites. That's all in Firebase at that point. And then I've got an about page. Hello, everything's cool. And you kind of see. So I'm to the point now where I just wire the data up. Just because, that's a lot of work. But I think that is, I think that's about it. I do have, and I'll get the slides out on the site, but I've got some resources and links to all the things kind of that I think we talked about and covered. Oh, here's a slide that didn't show up, but there it is. This is a screenshot talking about what's involved. We talked through all this. And this is fun. I thank everybody. Happy to take questions, but appreciate it.